Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to The Top. About a year ago, we talked about what I thought were the best episodes of Girl Meets World so far, and with Season 3 now in the books, it seems like the perfect time for an updated list. This show has no shortage of quality episodes, so even with honorable mentions, a lot will be missed. So don't forget to share your own thoughts on the best episodes down below. With all that said, let's kick things off with number 10. Back in Season 1, which feels kind of old upon rewatch, we got one of the most valuable episodes in terms of the point it gets across. The four friends end up in unglamorous jobs that they hate while simultaneously realizing that there are some people that have to work these jobs every single day. It's very straightforward in that way, as many Season 1 episodes are, but it's still a well-worked idea. The appreciation that comes from understanding the perspectives of people that are more often than not taken for granted is inherently valuable, but the most important word from that last sentence was perspective, because it goes beyond janitors and lunch ladies. It can also speak to understanding people who are just generally different and seeing their point of view as valuable, something that Season 3 elevates exceptionally well, proving that while middle school might be over for the cast, what they learned was not soon forgotten. I've been waiting for a day like Season 3 was a very up and down season, even though its average level of quality is arguably even higher than Season 2, but when the season got it right, it got it very right. Girl Meets Sweet 16 is a smart episode, not just because it progresses Smackle in a brilliant way, but also because it subverts the expectations that come with its title. This episode is not about anyone's birthday, it's about the broader idea of the future and the perspectives of those who rush through the present versus holding on to it. That narrative works really well for the worst possible reason, because at that point in time, we already knew that Disney Channel inexplicably pulled the plug on this show, which makes for an exceptionally poignant last few minutes when Topanga's decision looms over the cast. That all works, but without the added layer that comes from Smackle's involvement, this episode isn't nearly as high. This marks the second time Girl Meets World took their most valuable supporting character and allowed us a deeper peek into her psyche and why she acts the way she does, which also serves as a nice way to progress the only well-handled romantic relationship in this show. Really, really good episode, but in my estimation, not even the best Smackle episode. And speaking of Isadora, her first focus episode was one of the best executed ideas of the entire series. The point here is that Farkle and Smackle, who were intellectual rivals back then, are on opposite sides of the classic beauty is skin deep debate. But it's less about the debate itself. That's more of a summation of the things we know by the time it happens. It's more about how Smackle is able to meaningfully interact with the main cast for the first time and use her experience to make her case for beauty being skin deep. It also builds the foundation for why Smackle and Farkle work so well when they're allowed to develop together. Relationships are supposed to challenge you, make you better, and before they even considered taking that step, these two were already doing just that. But, more than anything, this episode shows how perspective can make a seemingly clear answer more nuanced than at first glance, which, not surprisingly, perfectly describes Smackle herself as the complete character. It's a rare episode that actually becomes a lot better with the added information that comes from Seasons 2 and 3, and definitely one of the all-time best. On the edge of something wonderful. Another Season 3 highlight came right in the middle of Maya losing herself. That entire trilogy proved to be one of the best aspects of the series as a whole, in spite of the dubious resolution. But the biggest reason Upstate is more than just a feel-good ending with a feel-good character return in Sean is because of how it functions, both for him and for Maya. Girl Meets World has never been afraid or ashamed of its place as something of a legacy series. It uses its status as a continuation of Boy Meets World to great effect in many instances, but here is where it might be most valuable. The idea of Maya being lost is basically a parallel to the large number of times something similar happened to Sean, and the show knows as much, so it uses specific shots and specific dialogue to get that message across and help Maya find herself. It's Maya looking into her future and almost allowing herself to feel happy once the episode resolves. I say almost because True Maya and I Do ended up being more concrete episodes regarding absolving Maya of her shackles to the past. It feels more like a Boy Meets World episode than almost any other in the series, but it also uses that not as a distraction, but as a means to assist the current generation. And Maya's purple hair near the end might just be the smartest parallel yet, even though it's probably unintentional. Life is crazy, but I know I can work it. And speaking of Maya, enter her single greatest focus episode. I don't know if I understood just how great this episode was on a first watch, but it actually is just that great. Even the side plot here proves to be important with time, as we're given more and more perspective on why Riley's old teddy bear that Augie destroyed holds so much value. But this is also an episode, maybe even more so than True Maya or Money, where Maya really shows growth by reaching out to her estranged father. Subtlety is one of the things I praise the most in my videos, and that moment with Maya looking back at her mother before preparing to hear out her father is exceptional. There are so many emotions wrapped up in just that one look between the both of them, not even taking into consideration all the other people who care about Maya at this point as well. And looking back at it, I think making Kermit kind of an okay guy who's made his mistakes was a good choice. Obviously, what he did was wrong, but he knows as much, and showing up here to face his now teenage daughter had to take some courage of his own. This was the episode that convinced many that Sabrina Carpenter was a force of nature, and her performance here was spot on, both in terms of dialogue delivery and with how her body language and reactions did a lot of the speaking for her. But the smartest aspect of the Forgiveness Project is how the project itself isn't just a singular class assignment. There's no easy fix, nor is there any guarantee that Maya will eventually forgive her father, even though she might be ready to someday. All in all, one of the most resonating episodes of the series. One of the more important and grander reaching episodes is Great Lady, which effectively gets at the heart of not just what makes America great already, but what makes culture and perspective and the understanding that comes from it great as well. A tiny detail here that should not be dismissed out of hand is how Nigel was used as a catalyst for this episode, who has appeared in almost every episode prior as a voiceless face of the classroom. But when his mother needed to speak about her story and how it connects back to Cambodia and all the gruesome history thereof, it is powerful. It's not preachy, it's not shoving patriotism in our face, it's not undermining other cultures except to prove a point about not doing that. It's about thinking deeper, looking deeper, understanding more about your story and the stories of others, and in conveying that message, it easily becomes the greatest episode of Season 3. However, there are a few elements holding this episode back from being arguably the greatest ever. For starters, cutting out Lucas's history prevented the least developed of the main cast from receiving some much needed development. And even though I thought what they did with Riley was effective in conveying an America that was just patriotic enough, it still took away from what could have been an interesting look into her own family tree. And Smackle being present would have been a very welcome peek into her unique diversity as well. And she maybe could have added even more gravity to the Farkle reveal at the end. I say maybe because that moment is pretty much perfect as is, with its minimal use of dialogue and the way the shot sits and then slowly pans out. It's close to a perfect episode, but I can only place it as high as 5 because some of the flaws are noteworthy, which is kind of fitting considering the next episode up. Bullying sucks. We all know it, we should all be against it, and there's absolutely no viable excuse for partaking in it. Boy Meets World never really took that idea seriously enough, which is why this is one of the few areas where Girl Meets World has it beat. But it goes beyond that narrative and establishes a sensible and affecting episode centered more around insecurity, something that has constantly plagued Riley as a character despite her always seeing the best in others. So it not only makes sense that she would end up being the catalyst that brought Farkle back, but also that her feeling invisible would manifest itself into an invisible bully for her to face later. And just like that episode, this one uses a slow build into the main issue, which also presents Farkle with his first legitimate problem to sort through. A great thing that was done here is understanding how Farkle would most likely react to the situation. He uses microphones, logic, and avoiding conflict as a means to resolve it, which fits who he is at the time. It's a rare early episode that understands emotional weight and frames it well, especially through the others and how they react to and confront Farkle's abuser. But the highlight on insecurities is still the smartest aspect of this episode, because everyone has them. It's here more so than any early episode where the characters become more fully realized people and not just actors. We see them for who they are, and more importantly, who they believe themselves to be, beyond just the laughs and the smiles. And when a show can grant you that level of understanding while still being sensible about it, it's doing something very right. You don't need me to tell you that Farkle and Smackle are very special characters. A few choice moments in episodes prior to this one can attest to that, but it's here where they truly become invaluable to the show. Here, Farkle goes through tests and it's determined that he might have Aspergers, a form of autism that Smackle does possess. Mental health and the conditions thereof are inherently important, but here's where things go from good to sublime. Using Aspergers as a potential catch-all way to describe why Farkle is so unique adds a ton of depth to his character, but adds even more depth to Smackle, who ends up being the only one of the two to have the condition. The reason this duality works is because Smackle and Farkle are similar characters, but the reasoning behind why doesn't have to be the same. A simple yet brilliant notion. And even though the other characters are only there for support in this one, they support pretty well. It's more clear here than ever that everyone around Farkle cares for his well-being, even when he doesn't have as dramatic a reaction to the news. Farkle has dealt with figuring out who he is and who he's becoming many times, so this episode shows one of his largest steps into maturity. But for him, it's a little more expected that he'd go through significant character arcs since he is a main character. But for Smackle, a recurring character, giving her the chance to develop through Farkle's story was a great move. She proves to be more than just some unfeeling robot, but a significant character that has been trying desperately to change certain aspects of herself for some semblance of normalcy, and the moments they share together are perfectly precise in addition to heartfelt. The resident geniuses can figure out a lot when they put their minds to it, but for everything else, they have each other. Now, I'm going to do something a little weird and do honorable mentions next, mainly because more so than any top I've done, there is such little separation between numbers 1 and 2 on this list, so I wanted to talk about both with minimal separation if that makes any sense. In any case, let's bring in the honorable mentions. You know you're dealing with a good show when you find yourself personally affected by the ups and the downs of the characters thereof. Riley Town goes 21 steps beyond that by ripping out your heart, throwing it on a set of train tracks, and making you watch the rest. As gruesome as that description is, that's what makes this episode arguably the best of all time. You pretty much all know what number 1 has to be now, so we'll talk about why it's number 1 when we get there. In this episode, Riley is dealing with a cyberbully, and just like I mentioned in Flaws, Riley Town is a slow build-up to a powerful reveal. But what makes this several times more affecting than that is how well Riley is written for before, during, and after telling Maya about what's been transpiring. And on top of that, Rowan acts the hell out of those scenes. The climax is just one of those perfectly heartbreaking moments where scripts and dialogue become one with the character, and it feels heavier than any moment ever captured on the show. And at that point, it goes beyond being a show and becomes an experience. This part is way more personal than analysis, but when I first watched this episode, I almost could not bring myself to finish it. I didn't think it would affect me that much, but then again, I also know exactly what Riley's going through here. And then we get a perfect resolution, with Riley confronting the nameless, faceless bully. Just a very smart choice to keep that aspect a mystery. It became even more empowering with Riley essentially talking to the world instead of a single person. Later episodes didn't tackle Riley's insecurities nearly as well, but here they got it really right.
No, 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 hell no, 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 I refuse, no, no.
Calling Bay Window the best episode ever might be a point of contention. It doesn't have the same emotional kick of Riley Town, nor does it have the same powerful character development of I Am Farkle, but it does something even more important. It perfectly captures the essence, the purpose, and the meaning of the entire series. Even though Legacy was a good episode, Bay Window captured the idea of growing up and the change that comes from it in such a phenomenally euphoric way that it kind of makes Legacy a bit pointless by comparison, and using the famous meeting location as a metaphor for those ideas was the best possible way to go. And now we dig into the characters, where they are, where they're coming from, and where they're going. Riley is very gung-ho on the idea of change, but Maya serves as the pull to her push here. Why? Because we know exactly what change equates to on Maya's side of things. Conversely, Riley's been sheltered a fair bit in her life, so naturally, change wouldn't scare her nearly as much. On the surface, this episode works with what we know, fills in some things we don't, and uses that to create the narrative. But the biggest reason this episode is the best ever has everything to do with the smaller details. The entire episode is unique in the fact that it's almost exclusively filmed in Riley's room. That was a great decision because the episode could really focus on the location that serves as the change metaphor, while also having a flashback driven side plot that adds to the episode instead of taking away from it. This also places the most emphasis on Riley and Maya as characters, which brings out some of their best acting ever to match with the best top to bottom script ever written for the show. Heck, even the younger versions of themselves deliver here. And when it all comes together with all three versions of themselves, it's at that point where Girl Meets World reaches self-actualization. The idea is to learn from the past while also embracing the future, a compromise of the original extremes of Riley and Maya's positions, an idea perfectly captured by this moment. There is no episode as necessary to the totality of the series while also balancing out being both a grand scale and a small scale concept, in addition to how much the characters learned here without needing a formal lesson plan. Change is unavoidable, that's a fact of life, but being ready for that change and preparing yourself to literally and figuratively take on the world, well, that's exactly why this show exists. Bay Window is number 1, so the list is done. And of course, thanks for watching.